Alrighty, I think that we can get started as people join. Thank you all so much for spending your evening with us, or for some your afternoon. My name is Nisha Srinivasan. I am the Vice President of Growth here at NOCD, and I am joined by my incredible colleague, Kathy. We are so excited to chat with you today, or about our tonight's event. Am I just anxious, or is it OCD? Um, our focus here is going to be on mental health, OCD, and anxiety, really talking through the differences between anxiety and OCD, or sometimes how they can coexist, and a special focus on how it can show up here in big cities like New York. So, with that, Kathy, I'll pass it over to you to introduce yourself.
All right, thank you. So, yes, my name is Kathy. I have been a mental health professional for 26 years. I always tell people that I was born a mental health professional, but anyway, we're not talking about age. Um, so I have worked in a variety of different settings. My entire career has been with different populations. My move to working with people with OCD happened about 2.5 years ago. I was burnt out from my previous job and I said, let me try something different. And I will be honest with you, this has been the best job that I've ever had in my career. One of the things that I love is working with people who struggle so much and help them find their joy again in life. So, one of the really big points of this whole program tonight is to determine, is it anxiety? Is it OCD? Is it stress? What is it? And really hoping to get you to get support and get help that you need if you need it. So let's talk about this. We're gonna kind of start right off and get into what's the difference, between anxiety and OCD. Um, the thing with anxiety and OCD is they're very much intertwined. Okay. Years ago, OCD was actually considered an anxiety disorder, and it is very much rooted in anxiety. So they can often look the same, feel the same. You can have the same intrusive thoughts, the same physical feelings. The difference really between the two lies in the compulsions. So what are compulsions? Talk about compulsions, and most people think of the stereotypical hand washing or organizing, okay, cleaning. I say stereotypes because there's a lot more compulsions that people don't recognize. So while, yes, hand washing and cleaning and organizing can absolutely be compulsions, so can things like mentally reviewing past conversations. So can ruminating, where you're sitting and thinking about something for hours on end. Okay. There are literally hundreds of different types of compulsions. So they can be physical and mental. In anxiety, you can have the intrusive thoughts, but you don't necessarily have to do anything to make yourself better or make yourself feel better. In OCD, you have those feelings and you have those thoughts, but your brain urges you to do something to take away those negative feelings. That is the main difference between anxiety and OCD. Now, in big cities like New York, right, or where I grew up, Philadelphia, um, you have a lot of stress put on you, right? It seems like time moves so much faster in big cities than in maybe some rural communities. So it's easy to normalize that kind of stress and anxiety that comes with living in those areas. Um, but really, and where I see most folks is where those intrusive thoughts and really those compulsions start to interfere with their lives. So that's when you have somebody who, let's say you have a college student, okay, who is checking the stove 12 times before they leave their apartment, right? And they keep going back and they know it's off. Or what they'll do is they'll look at it and go off, 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 then go to leave and say, wait, is the stove really off? And then turn back around. So it can really what is that? Is that anxiety or is that OCD? Well, in reality, that's OCD because you have the compulsion of checking and it's interfering in your daily life. Okay. So when we kind of talk about intrusive thoughts, when we talk about anxiety, you can be anxious about anything. All right. Think about if you're anxious, you have to speak up in a meeting, you have to do a presentation for work. Most of us become very anxious about having to present to other people. And we do worry, like, oh, did I sound unsure? Did I sound like I didn't know what I was talking about? Did I answer that question correctly? That's normal anxiety, or that's anxiety. In OCD, we hear, well, wait, if I present and I say something wrong, am I going to offend someone? Am I going to be a bad person? Am I going to get fired? What if I did offend somebody? What if I offended my boss and I get fired for that? Okay. And then you're constantly reviewing what you said in that presentation. It's almost like having blinders on. You can't see anything but this story that OCD tells you. Okay. That's OCD. Um, we talk about the cleanliness and germs. And it's funny because Nisha and I have been talking about examples of, some of these things. And she actually talked about an example that one of my members has actually dealt with. You know, we talk about the subway, right? Anybody who has to take a train to work or, doing buses, public transportation, subways, you always have that little bit of anxiety, like maybe this pole isn't as clean as it should be. People have touched this pole today. And you have that idea of maybe when I get out of here, I need to like wash my hands or something. Somebody with OCD, that's anxiety. Somebody with OCD says, if I touch this train pole, I am going to be contaminated with drugs. The reason why I used that example, I actually had a member who her fear was that if she took the subway, somehow there were going to be some type of drug on the pole of the subway. And if she touched that, she would then become unable to control herself because of the drugs. And so she would not use public transportation at all. And we worked together and we talked about it. And, it took a lot. And we finally got her to ride the subway and lean into the distress. Okay, this may have drugs on it. Then again, it may not. And she was able to ride the subway without having to constantly check her hands or constantly monitor her feelings or is something going on in my body. That was OCD. Okay. Checking is a huge compulsion with people with OCD. So some of us, if you have anxiety, will say, did I lock the front door before I left for the train? And you might go back and check it. Or when you leave the house, you check to make sure the door's locked. Okay, it's locked and you leave. Somebody with OCD has to check that door several times and are often late to things, work, social events, because that compulsion to check to make sure that everything is locked is so, so strong. Okay. You can see kind of anxiety is bad. And those of us who deal with that, I in no way want to downplay anxiety, right? Because I myself have struggled with anxiety. It can be really difficult. But when you get to a level of OCD, you're unable to do anything in a lot of ways because of the fears and because of the compulsions that you express. Okay. Another one of my favorites, I love treating people with relationship OCD because relationships are really, really tough, right? If you're in a relationship and you text your boyfriend or girlfriend and they don't necessarily get back to you right away, you may say, I hope everything's okay. I hope they get back to me soon. You still worry about them, right? That's anxiety. Somebody with OCD, if they don't get a text back, automatically you hear, what if? What if this isn't the right person for me? What if they're cheating on me? Wait, what if they're dead? And it sounds extreme, but you would be surprised at how many people with relationship OCD that those thoughts actually go through their head. Their loved one doesn't answer back right away. What if they're dead? Because OCD is always going to and take you to the extreme. It's always going to take you to the worst case scenario. Okay. Um, they may cancel plans so they can sit with their thoughts and feel more certain. And, it's too difficult for them to get out there because they're so anxious and because their OCD makes them afraid. We talked a little bit about work and doing a presentation, and, you know, this is for all of us, right? Have you ever sent an email to somebody and then thought, "Ugh, did I press too strong on that one?" Right? Sometimes you have to. But if you have anxiety, it's kind of like, oh, should I not have done that? That's anxiety. OCD says, what if I email my boss and what I emailed was inappropriate? And now he thinks or she thinks that I'm mean or I'm a horrible person. Wait, what if I get fired? What if, oh, I better check. So now we're sending emails saying, oh, I'm sorry if I came across wrong. Or we send emails saying, hey, are you mad at me? The purpose of those follow-up emails is really to seek reassurance. Again, another really common compulsion is checking to make sure that somebody's not mad at you or that you didn't do anything wrong or just to know that you're okay, right? OCD will constantly give you, I always say, what if is OCD's favorite question. OCD will always say, what if? What if you did that and something horrible happened? Okay. Prime example, a recent member of mine who's doing so well, um, came into treatment, and one of the things he was afraid of was bars of soap. Now, I want you all to just let that sink in a minute. He was afraid of bars of soap. And why was he afraid of bars of soap? Because if you leave a bar of soap out and it dries, aren't there germs on it? So now that bar of soap isn't clean. And what if that bar of soap has so many germs on it that it makes me sick? So this particular person he would take his shower with a bar of soap, but then he would go into the kitchen and wash a lot of his body down with Dawn dish detergent because somehow Dawn dish detergent was cleaner than a bar of soap. The first thing I had him do was use a bar of soap and not use Dawn afterwards. And what's funny about that is he messaged me that same day and he said, I've been laughing at myself all day long because every time he used the bar of soap, he's like, I can't believe I thought that this was full of germs. Okay. OCD is always going to ask, what if? What if this horrible thing happens? Then what are you going to do? And it's constant. We all get what if questions in our head, right? Well, what if my surgery doesn't turn out right? Or what if I don't get this new job? Or what if this happens? OCD, it's constant. It's almost constant. The one thing I want to stress too is, we live in these big metropolitan areas with high stress. Guess what makes anxiety and OCD worse? High stress. Anytime you're high stress, anxiety, and especially OCD is going to ramp up. Okay. And it's easy for people to say, oh, just manage your stress better. But we all know it's not that easy. We all know it's not that easy, especially if you're living in big cities because everything's moving so quickly, right? And in places like New York, where you've got high rent, small spaces, right? Fast moving. I mean, literally, it's called the city that doesn't sleep for a reason. That stress can impact your feelings of anxiety and absolutely will impact the feelings if you have OCD. So it is really, really hard. It's really hard. But there's ways to deal with this, right? I mean, it's fun to live in a big city. There's a lot of things going on, right? It's energizing. There's so much happening. You're never at a loss for for doing something, okay? But at the same time, it's really important for us to recognize what is quote unquote normal stress, what is anxiety, and what is OCD. Okay. Because while they can look very, very similar, they are very different in a lot of ways. Um, I have a few members. I mean, I'm licensed in New Jersey and Pennsylvania and pretty much the whole East Coast except for New York and Massachusetts. Um, I'm in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, Virginia, South Carolina, and now Florida. So I'm everywhere. Um, but the one thing that I can tell you is, especially with my members who live in New Jersey and work in New York, one of the things that they find is living in New York or working in New York does increase their OCD symptoms. It does increase their anxiety because it is just so fast paced. It is just so quick moving that it almost feels like they almost get overwhelmed easier. And I think that's really important to recognize. Recognizing in yourself when you're starting to feel overwhelmed and when you're starting to feel heightened senses of anxiety, and how are we going to take care of that? How are we going to treat it? And Nisha, that actually comes to your part where we talk about treatment and support.
That's right. Well, thank you so much, first of all, Kathy, for going through that.
Sure.
Hopefully
Sure.
some of those examples resonated for those of you on the call and helps to discern a little bit anxiety versus OCD. Obsessive compulsive disorder, it's common. And if some of this resonated, if you're thinking that, oh, this might be something that I have, you are not alone. 1 in 40 people has OCD. And interestingly, it's not really how the media represents it, nor maybe what you see on TV. Kathy illustrated some of those examples to show that OCD can take so many different forms, whether that's contamination OCD or that's relationship OCD, or if that's mentally intrusive thoughts and mental compulsions only, or mental intrusive thoughts and then some physical compulsions. So if you feel like you may have OCD, or you're wondering if your anxiety is more heightened than just anxiety, um, there is help out there. NOCD is one of those places to get help. Kathy's one of our remarkable therapists. We have therapists in all the states, and particularly many here in New York. Um, NOCD, we differentiate ourselves in a few different ways. The first is um, general talk therapy can be incredibly beneficial for a variety of different things, but for OCD in particular, in some cases, it can be quite harmful because it reinforces some of the need for reassurance. And so it's really important when treating OCD to have clinicians and therapists that are specialized, that are trained, that really understand the complexity of OCD. Here at NOCD, all of our clinicians specialize in OCD. So they are given rigorous training, very familiar with all the different subtypes of OCD and how it can present. Um, and in particular, we focus on something called exposure response prevention. It's a particular type of treatment for OCD and really kind of the gold standard, and one of the leading ways to treat OCD and demonstrated through scientific proof. In terms of our therapy, being in person or with work schedules, it can be really tough to go in person. So we purposely offer all virtual therapy. You can access your sessions with the convenience of your phone, right directly in our app. Um, and then we offer in between support session support as well. So as we all know, OCD can flare or trigger, not necessarily just within your session. And so we have the opportunity for you to connect with your therapist 24/7 through our app. In addition, there's several tools there like homework and resources. Um, and then I did want to highlight we have a community, a pretty awesome community for peer support, just to connect with others. In fact, what I'll do is I'll put a link into the chat, and if you'd like, it's totally free to join whether you're in therapy or not. With NOCD, but it will give you the chance to connect with others. So, in the top right of the link, you'll see a join button, and you should be able to click that. Simply include your email, and that will get you right into our free community. So, I'll put that there. And then I wanted to ensure that we really have time to answer all of your questions and answer what you're wondering about, maybe anything that you're struggling with. So what you should see is a chat Q&A button at the bottom middle of your screen. And if you could put your questions into the chat, Kathy will be happy to answer them. Please don't be shy. We'd love to answer any questions you might have. And it looks like we might have one now. So
Hmm.
I think that we can jump into those. I'll read this out
Yeah.
loud just for everyone. And then Kathy, I'll have you kind of give your perspective here. This question says, this person I know has been diagnosed with OCD and has been suffering for more than 25 plus years. The family is accommodating and is suffering along with her. None of them have a life of their own, and every action is revolving around the patient. She gets aggressive and threatens for suicide. There's grandiose and religious OCD associated with her. I don't know how to help her. So, not quite a question, but it sounds like
Yeah.
looking for help. How do you support, maybe if it's not you with OCD, but you have a loved one or a family or friend or colleague, and it can be difficult. Any thoughts on how to help or support them?
Absolutely. And thank you for that because I think you bring up a really good point that we haven't touched on, which is accommodation. Okay. One of the things that most families, especially with little kids, but also with adults, okay, families try to accommodate the OCD. So, in other words, if this person doesn't touch anything with their bare hands. They'll buy them gloves. They'll constantly supply them with Lysol wipes. I had one little girl who actually sprayed her sister down with Lysol every time they got home from school. And I finally said, you've got to stop buying the Lysol. Um, and it was really the family does accommodate that because most of our families don't want their loved one to suffer. So they actually get I hate to say it, but they get roped into kind of performing compulsions along with the person who has the OCD. So the best thing that you can do to support them is to number one, help them recognize if you can, it's not always easy, help them recognize that them accommodating the OCD is actually making the OCD worse. Okay. I have a few members who have these grand ideas, who have the religious OCD, the scrupulosity, and also have these threats of suicide. And sometimes those threats are actually a manifestation of the OCD. It's not that they really want to hurt themselves, but what they feel is it would be easier if I wasn't here anymore. I wouldn't have to deal with all of these thoughts and all of these things. Okay. The best way is to help them, if you can, seek help, seek treatment. Okay. If all you can do is say, hey, I went to this webinar and they talked about OCD and how to treat it, right? And give them information. You know, I I tell my members, I help you on the journey, but I can't make you do it. And unfortunately, you can't make anybody get help, but you can give them the tools they need if they so choose to get help. Um, it is not unusual for people to be undiagnosed OCD for years. They'll go their whole lives without having a diagnosis until they get the right provider that can say, hey, wait, I think this is OCD. Okay. In this case, it really is going to be about encouraging the person and the family to seek support. And it may just be as simple as saying, I had this webinar, here's this website, maybe this will help. Okay. Again, you can't make them, but you can certainly try. You can certainly try. I hope that's helpful. That's a tough decision or a tough situation because you're right. OCD, it not only makes the person's world smaller, it also makes the family's world smaller as well. And it's really difficult, really difficult.
Thank you so much for your insight there, Kathy. It looks like
Sure.
you are getting some more questions here, so we'll go down the list.
Good.
The next one is I have just started working with a therapist to start working on triggers and avoiding compulsions, namely hand washing. What am I supposed to be thinking about when doing an exposure? I was instructed to get anxiety down from a 10 to a 2, but how do I do that?
That's a tough one. Honestly, as a therapist, we'll say, oh, we want to get this down. We usually say 50%. We want to get it down from a 10 to a 5. But how do you do that? Okay. Hand washing is interesting because it depends on how bad it is. Okay. What you could say to yourself is no amount of hand washing is going to make my anxiety go away. Okay. And that is the truth because here's what happens with OCD. It's kind of like I don't know if any of you have pets, but I have a dog. And I know with my dog, if I give her cheese, she's going to go take it back to her bed and eat it and then come back for more. Right. And then the more cheese she eats, the bigger she gets. This is what happens with OCD. When you have OCD and you get that intrusive thought that says, hey, your hands aren't clean enough, let's go wash them again, and you wash them, you're training yourself and training your brain that you need to continue to wash your hands to make yourself feel better. Okay. So what we're trying to do in ERP is really say to you, okay, we're going to try to resist washing our hands and then lean into the distress. Meaning, hey, OCD is never going to be satisfied with the amount of time I spend washing my hands. So let me just wash them once and walk away, or wash them twice. Okay. Or that thought that OCD may be possible, but it's not a guarantee. Okay. You can even tell yourself something like, this gives me anxiety, but I am learning to handle the distress and I can do this. The thing that you don't want to do is give yourself reassurance. I've had a lot of people come and say they washed their hands and then they told us, I'm fine, and then walked away. Well, technically, that's reassurance. You're giving yourself the reassurance that I'm okay, I can do this. When really that's just feeding the OCD. Okay. I encourage you to go slowly. So while yes, the goal is to go from a 10 to a 2, all right, you're not going to do that in your first exposure practice. It may take you a, a lot of times to practice it before you get from that 10 to a 2. But I want you to celebrate every number that changes. So if you do it and it goes from a 10 to a 9, we're celebrating because you came down a point. And that may not sound like a whole lot, but it's one less point of anxiety that you're dealing with. Okay. You're going to find what works best for you. And honestly, we call them response prevention messages, prevention tips. These are all the things that you can say to yourself that don't give you reassurance, but help you lean into that anxiety. Because what you're trying to train yourself to understand is that just because you have that feeling does not mean that you're actually in danger. OCD wants you to believe that because you feel anxious, you're automatically in danger and we need to run for the hills. It's that fight, flight, or freeze response. Once that alarm bell goes off in your brain, I've got to do something to protect myself. It doesn't register that you're not really in danger. So keep at it. Keep at it. Just keep trying to tell yourself, I'm learning to deal with this. And you'll get there. It just takes time.
Thank you, Kathy.
Sure.
Super, super informative. And just to double down on one thing that you said, um, it can, there's some signs with OCD that often people miss. So, for example, um, sometimes it's hard to even pinpoint that you constantly are asking for reassurance. Some people, you can catch yourself when you're doing it, and for others, it may be just so ingrained, you don't even recognize that you're doing it. Another just point before we go on to the next question is that OCD, it's known as a doubting disorder, and I'm certainly no clinician and don't have a clinical experience, but what I can share is that it is known as to constantly make you feel like you require certainty, but that certainty cannot actually be achieved, and so it can be a pretty debilitating cycle sometimes, and really make you feel lonely, make you feel different, and isolated. And so I just wanted to take a moment to say, if you maybe are questioning, is it maybe just anxiety I have? Is it OCD? Is what I'm doing reassurance seeking? Is what I'm doing replaying the same thought over and over again? All of those considerations are they're normal. That is
Yeah.
okay. That's a
Yeah.
feel. But what I will do is NoCD actually offers diagnosis in our therapy. So, what you can do is book a free 15-minute call with us if you'd like to just learn more about how NoCD therapy works, understand what we're about. But I just wanted to highlight that in that first session, or even those first couple of sessions, we do have the ability to have clinicians and those licensed therapists to do a comprehensive diagnostic evaluation for OCD and help you feel a bit more confident about what it is that you're feeling or if it is OCD, and then to get the treatment that you need. So I'm going to put one more link into the chat now, which is for that free call. So the free calls, if you're just curious, if you want to learn a bit more, if you have some questions about how NoCD works, I will encourage you to book a call. It's free, it's 15 minutes, so it's quite short, and a member of our care team can tell you a bit more about us.
Mhm.
So I'll stick that link here. And just a reminder that the prior link, it does join you to our community. So if you're feeling like you'd love to connect with some other people, if you just like to maybe even post anonymously into a chat about some things that you're experiencing or feeling, our community is the perfect place for that. It's really supportive,
Mhm.
great way to connect with others. And if you are maybe thinking therapy might be in the cards for me, but I'm not just quite sure yet, I encourage you to check out that free 15-minute call and see if perhaps our care team can help explain a bit more about what we have to offer here at NOCD. All
Nisha,
right.
one of the things, Nisha, one of the things you said I do want to touch back on, which was the seeking the reassurance. I make my members kind of angry because I usually tell the families, stop giving them reassurance. And what I'll say is if you think that your loved one is giving reassurance, your only response should be, it sounds like OCD is really bothering you today. What do you think?
Hmm.
And it makes members a little on edge because they're used to getting that reassurance, but it also is a sign to them that, wait a second, I am seeking reassurance. So sometimes that's a good little tip if you're dealing with somebody who has OCD to try to not to give the reassurance. Yeah.
That's a great tip.
Yeah.
A great tip, especially for a few of
Yeah.
those of you who I think noted that you have friends or family or loved ones, and we're kind of seeking help on how to speak to them or talk to them or help them. That's a great tip, Kathy. So thanks for
Yeah.
sharing.
Yeah.
All right, shall we go on to the next? How early does OCD start? Is there a sliding scale on how severe it can be?
Absolutely. Okay. So we see children as young as 5 here at NOCD. Um, it can start that early. Now, for some kids, it is OCD, right? For some kids, it also can be related to viruses, which that's pretty unusual, but it does happen where the kid gets sick and then all of a sudden there's these extreme OCD tendencies pop up. Um, for the most part, it can be kids as young as 5. And we see people all the way up. Okay. Sliding scale of severity, yes. No one actually starts, well, I shouldn't say that. Most people don't start with severe OCD. It kind of is insidious and it creeps up. So, as an example, I had a girl who was 14 and she stopped going to school. She stopped hanging out with her friends. She stopped really leaving the house. And she would take 3-hour showers. And if she didn't take a 3-hour shower, she wasn't able to sleep in her bed. She had to sleep in an air mattress in her room. And she only slept on the air mattress if she took at least an hour shower. If she didn't take an hour shower, then she was either sleeping on the floor or on a chair in the living room. And when I met with her the first time, first 3-hour showers, I'm thinking, what did you do when the water ran cold? Because, most hot water tanks don't have that much hot water in them. Um, and, she told me she would stand under freezing cold water because her shower didn't feel right if she wasn't there for 3 hours. And when I asked her how did this start, she said it actually started with a 15-minute shower. And she's in the shower and she had the feeling. Now, there's such a thing as just right OCD where you have to do things until it feels right. She had a feeling that her left arm was not clean enough and she had to clean it until it felt right. That was the beginning of her OCD because that 15-minute shower went to a 20-minute shower. And then, okay, the left arm doesn't feel right, neither does the right arm now. Now it's a half-hour shower. And over time, her OCD started to tell her more and more that it doesn't feel right. When I saw her, she was very, very debilitated. And I will tell you that I got her to a certain point and I actually had to talk to her and her mother about going to a higher level of care and doing an intensive outpatient program, which she did. And I'm happy to say she came back and she was not taking 3-hour showers and she was sleeping in her bed and she was back at school and she was back to being almost herself. We still had to work on some things, but it usually doesn't start out as being that extreme. It's usually a buildup over time because again, the more you do a compulsion, the worse your OCD is going to get. Um, the one thing with OCD is people don't understand that we all get intrusive thoughts. I've gotten intrusive thoughts. Intrusive thoughts really are just unpleasant, unwanted thoughts. Okay. You can have a thought, and somebody without OCD would say, that was a really disturbing thought, and then move on with their day. Somebody with OCD says, that was a really disturbing thought. And why did I get that thought? And I have to figure out why I got that thought. And what if I really want to do what I did in that thought? And wait, I have to now spin around and knock on wood 3 times before it feels better. And then I've got to do this and I've got to do that. And that's how OCD works. Okay. And the one thing about OCD is it always attaches to what means the most to you in that moment. It's never going to attach to a peanut butter and jelly sandwich because who cares, right? But it will attach to your family. It will attach to your job. It will attach to your relationship. It will attach to you and make you feel like you don't know who you are as a person. So yes, it can start as young as 5. Yes, it is a sliding scale. And this is why I encourage people so much to get treatment early so that we're not dealing with the extremes.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
Looks like we're getting lots of questions. So excited to have
Good.
such an
This is
engaged
great.
discussion. Yes, we'll keep moving along. All right. The next one is my friend has mental OCD. So it's more the repeated questions rather than repeated actions. She doesn't realize she is asking the same question, but in different words. I've been with her for so long, I didn't even realize I was mentally getting affected. Now I feel like I have PTSD. How do I help myself who has side effects of someone's OCD?
That is a great question. And here's what's happening. It's not necessarily that she's trying to ask the same question in different ways. She's trying to get reassured. So whatever she's asking, she's testing whether you're going to give her that reassurance. So in other words, kind of like saying, do I look okay in this outfit? And then saying, does my butt look big in this outfit? Wait a minute, do my hips look big in this outfit? And constantly giving that reassurance that everything looks fine. Now that you recognize it, and this is important for you, kind of goes back to what do you say? I think you have to kind of point out, you've asked me that already, and stop giving her the answer she wants. Okay. It's almost like placing boundaries on the relationship, right? I have a lot of people where, and it sounds silly, but they have an OCD book. And if they ask the same question repeatedly, the family member writes it in the book. Here's the answer. And then every time they ask after that, it's in the book. Go read it. It's in the book. Go read it. It takes you out. It extracts you from the cycle of OCD that's going on in her head. Okay. Right now, you're in the eye of the storm. And by engaging with her compulsion to seek reassurance, not only are you making it worse for her because she's never going to be satisfied with your answer, because that's just how OCD is, doubting disorder, it also drives you crazy. And it's going to affect your relationship. Eventually, you're just not going to want to hang out with this person. You're not going to want to be around this person because you're feeling those effects. So the best thing to do is to stop answering, answer her once and then say, it sounds like something's really bothering you. Even if she's not technically diagnosed with OCD. If she is and you know it, say, it sounds like your OCD is bothering you. If she's not, or you're not privy to that information, you gotta say, it sounds like something's really bothering you because you asked me that already. And then let it go. That's the best way you can handle it for her and for you. honestly. Yeah.
Great.
I hope that helps. Yeah, that's a tough one. I hope it helps.
Um, this one is from Teresa. I get triggered and it is hard for me to figure out because my brain is so intent on knowing for sure. I don't trust my sense, my thoughts, and I'm always saying, what if I'm wrong and someone might get hurt?
Yes. All of the yes. Absolutely. That is classic OCD thoughts, honestly. Your that thought of I have to figure this out. And it's almost like your brain won't let you go until you figure it out because it's searching for that 100% certainty that something will or won't happen. The hardest part about that, actually, there's two things that are really hard about that. Number one, nothing is certain. You are not guaranteed anything. Okay. I said that to a member once and they said, well, what about death? And I said, well, yes, you're right. Death is certain, right? We're all going to die someday. But do you know how? Do you know when? Do you know where you will be? Even with that, there is so much uncertainty. Okay. That you're never going to get an answer. You're trying to solve the unsolvable, right? And then the last thing, the what ifs. OCD's favorite question is what if? What if that happens? Or what if I don't do this and someone gets hurt? Again, it goes back to the uncertainty of it. And what you need to kind of learn is that we all live with that uncertainty. Nobody has the answer. At least nobody on this spiritual plane has the answer. Okay. And while it causes you anxiety to not have the answer, you have to work on accepting that you're never going to get a clear answer on that, at least not in this lifetime. That's why ERP is so helpful because it does help you to learn and come to grips with, I'm never going to know that answer. And it still can give me anxiety. It can still bother me, but it doesn't have to ruin my life. And it doesn't have to take the joy out of my day to day living. Yeah,
Great, thank
sure.
We've got a few more in about 10 minutes, so I think we might be able to get through all of them, which would be great. The
It'd be
next
awesome.
one, can this support you are offering be used by someone who isn't in the USA?
That is a great question. And we do have clinicians that work in Europe and other areas of the world. Um, I am not sure as to what countries we are in. I know we're in England and a couple other places. What I would say is call and find out, you know. Um, every countries and we have different rules and stuff like that. Definitely call and find out because I know we are in a couple of other countries.
Perfect. Thank
Yeah,
you. And also the
sure.
community too is open to international and US. So you can certainly join the community as well. And to echo Kathy, do give a call and our support team would be happy to check into your particular location for you. All right. I see one in the chat. How do you
Okay.
choose which no CD therapist would be a good fit?
Oh, that is a great question. And one that I had to really come to terms with when I first started here at NOCD. Um, here's what I will say. It's like every other therapist. You're going to see if you click and don't feel bad if you don't and decide you want to transfer to somebody else. What I will suggest is on our website, every therapist has a profile. We give you a little blurb and then there's a really cool video of us. I roll my eyes because I know I look like a big dork in mine, but that's besides the point. Um, and so look at those, kind of see where, what, who might be a good fit for you. and then book a session. And you can tell pretty quickly, our first two sessions are a lot of, getting to know you and trying to figure out, how can we help you and what's going on. You'll get an idea of if this person is going to be a good fit for you. And if they're not, do not feel bad about saying to that therapist, hey, I don't feel like I have a good that this is going to work for me. I may switch to another therapist. There's nothing wrong with that. When I first started, I mean, I think I'm pretty terrific. And but when I first started, I had a member who transferred from me pretty quickly and I was devastated. And one of my trainers actually said to me, she said, "Don't take this personally. Something didn't click with the member." And that's okay. So look at those profiles, read the little introductory paragraphs, kind of look and see. Um, do as much of that online as you can so that you have a good grasp of who we are as individuals. And then, you're going to see once you get into therapy.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Most
Yeah.
of our therapists have a video on their profile, so you can get a sense of, what their tone is like. We do conscientiously make sure that we put some background there in terms of if they have a specific understanding of um, let's say, an associated condition like tics or hoarding or um, anxiety or ADHD. Also, you should be able to search by location so you can
Mhm.
just peruse there. And then if you do call in, our team is also happy to help match you with a therapist based on preferences that you provide us. You can do that on the web or with our team if you prefer for them to kind of help guide you. That's available as well. All right. So next is I've been in therapy for 8 years, and my therapist said I didn't have OCD because it wasn't occupying enough of my day. I find a new therapist trained in OCD, and on the Yale
Mhm.
scale, I'm 36 to 38. Why is this so unrecognized with other trained therapists? It feels defeating to realize I wasn't diagnosed despite seeing a therapist regularly for years.
Yes, it is defeating and frustrating and very angering. Um, and I will tell you, the reason why is because we as therapists and as mental health professionals get literally 30 minutes to an hour of training on OCD. And I am not saying that flippantly. I'm saying that as someone who's been through two master's programs, one in counseling psychology and one in social work. And I did not know anything about OCD until I started working for NOCD. Um, I have had instances where I remember one, and I felt so bad. One of my members had come to me with um, pedophilia OCD, which that is one of the more difficult types of OCD to deal with, feeling that you're going to harm a child. And she said, should I talk to my psychiatrist? And I said, that's not a bad idea. Let him know, that we're working together. We're going to start therapy, thinking naively that this psychiatrist would be supportive and know what he was talking about. And he did not, because I got a message from her the next day basically saying that the psychiatrist told her that this is not OCD, that this is just her desires. I had a very strongly worded conversation with that psychiatrist after that and educated him on what OCD was. Unfortunately, it is an error and a lack of education for those of us in mental health. When you get someone who is trained in OCD, we can pick you out. We need 15 minutes to talk to you. And nine times out of 10, we can give you a good diagnosis because we know what we're looking for. There are so many people that are misdiagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, kids who are diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder, people who were diagnosed with ADHD that in reality have OCD, and they don't get diagnosed until they come to places like NOCD for treatment. So, yes, it's frustrating and demoralizing and defeating and all of those horrible things. And it is a failure in our education system when it comes to educating on OCD. That's why it's so important for people to come to NOCD and get that good diagnosis because, we really do know what we're talking. I'm sorry that happened to you, but I'm glad that you're finally with someone who knows what you're dealing with and can help you. Yeah.
Amazing answer, Kathy. And
Mhm.
yeah, I would second that we empathize with it. A lot of what we do at NoCD, of course, is focused on helping people to get better, but also to raise awareness and start the conversation um, and showcase the importance of education around OCD. And that's precisely why, because otherwise, the risk of misdiagnosis or lack of diagnosis or treating it in different way by other therapists or clinicians who may have good intent, but not the expertise and specialization to recognize OCD, that can be really damaging.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Alrighty, I know we've got 1 minute left. We've got two questions, so I'll get through these quite quickly, if that's all right.
Yes.
The next one is,
Mhm.
I'm calling as a parent of a child, a 12-year-old boy diagnosed with OCD. Is there help options available for young ones?
There absolutely is. Um, I have to tell you that OCD, I should say no CD, we are all trained in how to deal with not only adults with OCD, but also kids and teens with OCD. And I will say that when I first came to No CD, I never really wanted to work with kids. Kids scared me. I have my own kids. I can deal with them. I was afraid of dealing with other people's kids. They are some of my favorite kids to work with because we can be creative with their hierarchy. We can be creative with their treatment. One of the biggest things that I always ask before I meet a kid, I either ask them or their parents, what do they like? I don't know if you can see my back, although you may. I have a lot of toys. I have a lot of things because it helps me connect with the kids that I work with. We absolutely can take care of your son and get him good treatment so that he doesn't have to suffer the rest of his life. So there are ERP works with kids just like it does with adults, and it does work.
Awesome. Something that we do pride ourselves on is ability to treat children, adolescents, and adults. Um,
Yep.
and last question, just so we can keep relatively on time here. I
Yes.
have anxiety during the day. It tends to increase when I do mental activities like programming or even having a conversation. At that point, I'm telling myself that only I see that person. Even though I'm 100% sure that I'm talking to or seeing a real person, the thought is still annoying. I don't think I perform any mental compulsions and the thought vanishes, but then it reemerges in the next similar situation. Is this anxiety or pure OCD?
That is a great question. And I think it really does, um, it kind of gives you a look into how difficult it can be to tease out what is it, right? Um, when we talk about pure OCD, we're talking about, having the intrusive thoughts, but not having the physical compulsions. You still may have the mental compulsions. And what it sounds like is that that mental compulsion is that kind of ruminating. It's that thinking about it, right? And yes, it does. Sometimes you can go a while without having the intrusive thought, but that conversation or that programming or whatever you're doing is the trigger that starts the intrusive thoughts. Um, you know, it it really would be interesting to kind of have you come in and book a session and see, you know what is it? What's the criteria? What how much does it bother you? Does it impact your day? Does it cause you distress? There's a lot of things that go into a diagnosis. What I would say is if you're concerned about it, book the call and let's see. Either if it's anxiety, if it's OCD, either way, it can be treated with ERP. That's the best part about ERP. It goes for anxiety, it goes for OCD, it goes for phobias. If you're afraid of bugs, I'm your girl. I got all kinds of bug pictures. Um, all kinds of anxiety disorders we can treat with ERP.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Kathy. Thank you to all of you that took time out of your evening, if not afternoon, to join us here. Hopefully, this was helpful. Hopefully, you learned a little something. Excited to share that we will be doing more events. So look out for our event next is Conversation for the Black community in light of Juneteenth on mental health and OCD on the 18th. And then if you are local here in New York, we are gearing up to plan some fun events both in the city in person as well as virtual ones geared towards New York. So thank you to all of you for joining, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening. Do check out that community link and the book a call link that were both in the chat. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.